Well, hello Internet, and welcome to part 14 of my tutorial series on how to make Android apps. In this part of the tutorial, we are going to create an Android translation app using the previously made web service. And if you didn't follow along with that, I have a link to it in the description under the video. And I'm also going to show you how to parse JSON data inside of Android. So, finished translation app, let's go take a look at what it's going to look like. Alright, so here is the translation app, and capability-wise it's pretty awesome. The interface is simple, but it's just simple so that it'll be very easy to follow along and understand exactly what's going on with it. I'm going to type some random stuff here. I'm typing in, I like to drive fast, even though I really do not, and just random stuff just to prove that it actually can translate fairly well. It's more of a transliteration app than anything else. You can see everything there popped up on the screen, and if I eliminate that, you can see all the different languages we can translate into. So let's go and make it. Okay, so that was the basic translation app. Pretty much everything functionality wise is there. Of course we could make updates to the interface, and we will, but let's just start the project. So I'm going to go new project inside of Android Studio, and I'm going to call this translation, and there we go, and I'm going to leave everything here exactly the same. Ice cream sandwich, click next. I'm going to keep a blank activity, click next, and I'm going to leave this named my activity and activity my. I'm sure if you've been following along you know what all those things mean, and let's go build it. Now while that's building, I thought I'd show you the web service here up close. I have the URL right here, and what I'm doing is I'm passing in the words I saw a cow and chicken. Just the first thing came to mind, and you can see that it automatically created this JSON data with the translations inside of it. So the point of this application is to jump in here and grab this data and display it on the screen. Okay, so everything is open inside here and built, and the very first thing I'm going to do is go and get my Android manifest file, which is right there inside of the resources folder. Open that up, and the only thing I need to do in here is get permission within the app to be able to access the internet. And to do that, all I need to do is go Android. Well, you might as well just click on that since it's right there, and there you go. Otherwise, you'd have to sort down to where it had I for the permission and pick on internet, and there you go. Now we can jump over and figure out our layout. I'm also going to go into the resources folder and layout and open up activity my.xml. Okay, so this is everything we're going to be working with here. Now I'm going to keep this extremely simple. I'm going to switch into the design view by clicking the tab at the bottom of the screen. There it is right there. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put an edit text area where they're going to be able to enter whatever they want translated. So, well, before we do that, let's just grab the hello world that's here and let's just move it out of the way. This is a relative layout. As you can see over here, relative layout. And I'm going to get a plain editable text field and drop it inside of there. And then underneath of it, I'm going to throw in a button. So just grab a button and throw it underneath there as well. Okay, so there's that. Now I'm going to jump into the text area and fix this up so it looks a little bit nicer. Okay, so I got this all open inside of here. This is activity my. This is the layout file, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change this to match parent. I'm also going to come in here and align this to the left right here. Just change the top to left, and I'm going to change this to align parent start. Probably should have just deleted the hello world. It would have generated this a little bit better, and of course set that to true. Then we can get rid of this and everything will line up properly. As you can see it did over here. See, now the editable text area fills the whole entire screen. Now come down to the button area right here. I'm also going to have this be match parent. There we go. You can see it fills the screen. Text inside of this, I'm going to change this to translate. Let the ID be the same. Let everything else be the same so far. I am going to change the ID on this guy right here to translation text view. And I like to have this up on top. Looks a little bit nicer. There it goes. Come into the text area and I'm going to change this to enter words above for translation. Whatever, it doesn't really matter what I put there. And then put my mouse right there. And then over here on the left side of the screen, a little light bulb comes up, extract string resource. And then I'm going to call this translation text view so that we have that saved in the strings.xml file. We can leave the width and the height set for this. That's perfectly fine. We don't want it to align to the top of the parent. That's going to cause confusion. We also don't want this start. Then after making those changes, we can open this up and you can see that things aren't spaced very well. Button actually looks pretty good, but the text view down here for the margin top, let's try setting that to 64 instead. That's not enough. Let's move it down a little bit. And after playing around with it, 94 looks pretty good. Again, I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible. And that looks good enough for activity my. Now let's jump over into myActivity.java and start parsing the JSON. Alright, so inside of the main myActivity class, one thing that I know I'm going to be playing with here is the editable text box. That's where they are going to enter in the words that they want translated. So I'm just going to call this translate edit text. Good enough. We'll be able to access that now easily. Inside of onCreate, we don't really need to do anything. One thing I did forget. Let's jump over into ActivityMy.xml again. For the button, I'm going to need to have a method in here that is going to perform certain actions whenever the button's clicked on. So we'll just type in onClick. There it is. And whenever that is clicked on, I am going to call a method called onTranslateClick. And just put my mouse there, and I can jump over to my light bulb. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. You guys say you don't like that, but I'm going to click on TranslateClick in myActivity. It's going to create it for me. And there it is right there. Okay, so whenever this button is clicked on, what we're going to do is we're going to go in and access the words that they entered that they said they want translated. And those words are going to be in the editable text box. So let's put it in here as well, translate. I'm doing this largely out of my head, so sometimes I might make some changes as I go along. So yes, sometimes there are some codes in here that are not necessarily needed. So we need to translate this into an editable text box, and then we're going to do a find view by ID, and then we just type in r.id. and edit text is the name of it. There it is. And of course, jump over into ActivityMy right here. And if we look inside of here, it is indeed called edit text. So that's how I got that. So there we go. Now I'll be able to access and change and do all kinds of things with it. Now the very first thing I want to do here is check if the user actually entered words to translate, and if they did, then get the JSON data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check if that editable text box is empty inside of another method. So let's just make this protected, and it's going to be Boolean, and I'm going to call this is empty, and you're going to pass in the editable text object, and it is going to tell you if it's empty or not. Now I could just do a get text and check for length and things like that, but I also want to go in and trim any white space because that's not going to translate well. So what it's going to do is it's going to return edit text, then I'm going to say get text. So I need to get the text that's currently inside of there, and then I need to translate it into a string, and then I'm also going to come in and trim it, get rid of white space because we can't translate white space, and then I'm going to check the length and if it is equal to 0. So if it's empty, it's going to return true, otherwise it's going to return false. So now we can jump back over into the onTranslate part, which is triggered whenever the button is clicked on, and we can say if not is empty, which means it is not empty, and then we'll just pass in our translate edit text. Well then, how about we pop a toast inside of here, make text this, and say something like getting translations so that they know something is going on. And because this might take a minute or two, let's also change the length to long, and then jump out of there and say show the toast, and that'll show on our screen. Then what we're going to do is we're going to call a method called doInBackground to execute, and for right now I'm just going to call for that and then create it immediately thereafter, and it's going to be called save the feed execute, and we'll create this in one moment. Since I'm here, I might as well just get this all over with. And otherwise I'm going to open up another toast. Let's just go and copy this, and we'll say something like enter words to translate if they didn't enter anything in there. Enter words to translate, and let's make this short because it's not going to show on the screen. And there we go. Now if we wanted to go and get JSON data or get any type of data or do anything in the background, what it's going to do is it's going to lock down the interface for our app, which might frustrate the user and make them think that something's broken or not working. So to get around that, what we use is what is called an asynchronous task. And what that's going to allow us to do is perform background operations without locking up the user interface. And to create it, the way these are normally created as an inner class, and it's called save the feed because that's what I called it. And to create this, we're going to go extends asynchronous task, and then this part I'm just going to put void in here a whole bunch of times because it's not going to need to do a lot of different things. I'll explain what the voids are. Now the very first void right here is saying that this is not going to receive any parameters whenever it's called for. The second void is going to say that it's not going to be monitoring the progress of this task being performed, and then this final void says that well, after the method called doInBackground, which we're going to create here in 1 second, is executed, it is then going to call another method called OnPostExecute, and this void here is saying that do in background is not going to pass anything to OnPostExecute. You'll see it in a second, just hold on. So what we're going to do first here is I'm going to create a string, and this string is just going to be the JSON data in basic string format. So string, JSON string, and we'll just have nothing inside of it. And then I'm also going to have another string, and this is going to be the result with all the translations, and it is going to ultimately be pasted into the application so that people can see the translations. Now this has an underline because it is going to force us to create a method, and that method, specifically implement methods, is called do in background. And you can see it right there, do in background. Okay, so it's going to create that for me. And this is what is going to be executed whenever this guy right here is called for. So that is what it's saying. It's saying make do in background execute. So the whole point in this do in background is that it is going to go in here and get that JSON data. So we're going to need to get the actual words that we want to translate, and that is stored in the editable text box just like before. And then we'll create another string, and we'll call this words to translate, and we'll get the translate editable text, and we'll say get text, and then after that we'll say to string, and that is going to get that for us. Then we're also, we jump over into the JSON data and look at the URL. All the words are separated with plus signs in this situation, so we want to put those plus signs everywhere there's a space. So we'll get our words to translate, throw those in there, is equal to, and then we'll go words to translate, and we'll say that we want to replace any spaces with plus signs. There we go. And now we're getting into actually parsing the JSON data. Very first thing we're going to need is a client that's going to be used to grab the data from a provided URL. And I'm going to use the default HTTP client here. And I'm just going to call it HTTP client is equal to new. And then it's going to be default HTTP client. And then we'll just go new basic HTTP parameters. Okay, so that's going to be the client. It's going to sort of act like a browser acts as a client to read data. So that's what it's there for, just to keep it very simple. And then I'm going to create an HTTP post that we're going to provide the URL for our post request. There that is. And I'll just keep the name simple also. Is equal to new HTTP post. And then I'm going to get my URL. I might as well just jump over there. Grab this guy right here. And this is a live web service you'll be able to use. One failing of the last tutorial I did inside of Android is I relied on Yahoo to be able to always provide the data, and that was a big mistake. So I'm fixing it here. Now I have a web service, and if worse comes to worse and I get hit by a bus, you guys can go and download the web service and use it on your own computers if you'd like. And then we're going to put the words to translate there at the end with the plus sign separating them, and now we got our URL that we're going to be able to pull our data from. We need to also tell it that our data is going to be in JSON format, so we need to set our header to content type and then application/JSON. And then we'll go into and create an input stream that's going to allow us to input a stream of bytes from our URL. Input stream. And let's just make this null. And then we need to start getting this data. Now there's all kinds of problems that could occur, so that normally means we need to surround it with a try block. We're going to have a response coming to us whenever the client calls for the post request to execute, and then send our response back to us. Let's just call this response is equal to, and to execute this we go HTTP client and then execute. And then we pass inside of it that URL right like that. And it's going to have a line underneath of it which is going to tell us that we need to handle an exception. Just come over here, click on this, add catch clauses. It does it right for you, pretty nice. Jump back down inside of here. We're then going to create an HTTP entity, just call it entity, and it's going to hold the message that is sent from the response. If we call get entity, if we spell get entity right, there we go. Then we need to get the content that was actually sent, and we'll go entity dot get content. Then we need to read this data, so we'll create a buffered reader, which is going to be very efficient in pulling this data over. Just call it reader is equal to new buffered reader, and then inside of this we'll put an input stream reader, which is going to convert the bytes into characters for us. But to be able to do that, we need to pass it the input stream, and then specifically tell it, hey, this is UTF-8. Very, very important. If you do not do this, it is going to mess up all your characters because we're using UTF-8 characters with our web service. And just put 8 inside of there, which is going to define the input buffer size. And there we go. And now what I'm going to do is create a string builder. Let's call this SB for short, is equal to, this is going to store each line of data for us. String builder, and I'm going to have another one called string line, and this is going to be a temporary holding cell for each line that we pull in there. And then we will create a while loop here, and line is equal to, and then just call reader dot read line, and we'll continue cycling through this as long as it's not equal to null. So I'm going to get all the lines of data, and whenever we don't need anymore, we're going to stop. Now I'm going to store or append to the end of my string builder each of those lines. So just go line plus, and then let's say we want to have a new line after it so that everything shows up, the translations all show up on their own lines. And that's all we need to do with the while loop. And then after it gets all those lines for us, we're going to go and store those in our JSON string. So let's just convert from a string builder to a regular old string. Works fine. Now, if you want to know how to create a JSON object, all you need to do is pass in. There's all kinds of things you can do with this. I'm going to show you some of them, even if it doesn't make the code that efficient, just so that you see them in action. JSON object, and all you need to do is pass in the JSON string in string format, and it creates it for you. That's pretty good. And it's going to say we need to handle an exception. Just click over here, say add catch clauses. I don't even look at those, which is great. Now this data is going to be passed over as an array that is specifically going to be called translations. So what we want to do is get and save this whole entire array as a JSON array. That's very easy to do. We just go to JSON array right there. Just call this JArray is equal to, and then we call the JObject, and we say get JSON array and pass in the name of the array, translations. There it is. That's how easy it is. And now what we need to do is cycle through each of the translations in those arrays and save them and then display them on our app screen. And we're going to create a method, and I'm going to call it output translations. And of course it doesn't exist yet, and it's going to accept a JSON array, and there that is. So we'll have to create that here in a second. Let's just copy it, and everything else is fine. Return null, no problem. Now after this is all done with, we can go protected, and it's not going to return anything, so void and output translations, and we'll call this JSON, or this is a JSON array we're going to be passing in here. There it is. And just to differentiate this, let's call this JSON array. There we are. Another thing we're going to need to do is after this guy, do in background, is executed, like I said before, we are then going to call another method, and that method is called OnPostExecute. So we want to create that inside of here. So let's just right click it, and then we're going to go in here and click on generate, and then over here, override methods. And then you're going to see OnPostExecute. You can also see there's things you can do before do in background is executed. OnPostExecute, and there it is. Let's take it and move it down here below so we don't get confused. Let's put it right here after do in background. Makes sense to be there. And one thing also to remember is do in background cannot do anything to the interface. So you can go and you can get information from the interface, but you can't put information into any of the components in the interface. That stuff is all handled by OnPostExecute. And I'm going to show you what we're going to do there here in a second, but let's stick with output translations. Okay, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a string array, and I'm going to call it languages, and it is going to store all of the different languages we can translate into, so it'll be easier to iterate over them. So we have Arabic, we have Chinese, we have Danish, we have Dutch, we have French, German, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, and then finally Spanish. And the reason why it's important to have these in the correct order is we're going to be pulling. These are arrays, and we're going to be cycling through them one at a time, but then we have to ask it specifically for string names. So Arabic, Chinese, all of these are in order. So it's very important to have them in the same order as the data you're pulling it from. That'll keep everything very simple. You're going to see here in a second what I'm talking about. So then inside of a try block, because we might have some problems here, we're going to save all the translations by getting them with that specific key name that's in the language's string array. And we'll just go in here, int, and I is equal to, this is going to be the first index in our array, our JSON array. And we can say as long as there's information to get out of there, we want to keep getting it, and increment that. and then we'll go and create a JSON object, because each one of those pieces inside of that array is a JSON object, and we'll just call this a translation object. And to get the specific one, we'll go JSON array and get JSON object, and I is going to be the index for that. And it's going to say, hey, you need to handle an exception. Okay, no problem. Add that. Thank you. And then we're going to store all this in the result, which is going to have all the translations. And this is where we'll use the languages array again. So we're going to say we can use I because that's going to be in order as well. And then let's say that whenever we display it, we want a colon there. And let's jump to the next line. And then we can go translation object. And if you want to get a string that is associated with a specific key, which is going to be in our string array, in our languages array, just do that. And then at the end of it, let's say you want to do a new line, and there you go. And the only thing left to do is jump up here on OnPostExecute, and this is just going to put all of our translations inside of our text view. We don't need this. Let's get rid of it. And if we want to edit our text view, we just go text view. And what's our text view called? Activity my. Let's jump up here. There it is. It's called translation text view, so I'm just going to keep the same name. Jump back over here to my activity, translation text view. And of course this needs converted into a text view. Find view by ID, r.id. translation text view. There it is. And now that we have that text view, we can go translation text view and set the text to result that contains all the translations. There you go, guys. That's it. Not that much code. Look at that. Almost nothing. And that is going to make our little translation app. It's not perfect. It's basically a transliteration app, which does a word-for-word sort of replacement, but it works surprisingly well. It loses like the feminization or masculine side of the languages, but I basically made this entire thing in 3 hours, so that's the best that I could do. So all the code is available in the description underneath the video. You're free to use it, do whatever you want with it, and please leave your questions and comments below. Otherwise, till next time.